Hello. So yesterday we looked at prehistory, or that time frame of human existence before the development of civilizations. We refer to it as prehistory because this is effectively before we have history. As I've mentioned multiple times, history does not refer to the past. History refers to the records left behind that paint a picture of the past for us. So before the development of civilization, these are prehistoric times because we don't really have any records of that time. So we effectively don't have a history before civilization. Today, we're going to look at effectively what a civilization is and why we needed to develop agriculture and why agriculture is so important for the development of civilization. Again, as I said, our main guiding question for this unit is why was agriculture so important? Why is agriculture so important for civilization? So first off, we need to identify what a civilization is. And a civilization it's hard to define per se, but it has a lot of pretty easily identifiable characteristics or traits that I've listed out here. So this is my list of traits that all civilizations have. And they have to have all of these in order to qualify as a civilization, or what is simply defined as the most advanced structure and level of human society. And again, that's not a very descriptive definition, hence why I think going off of this list of traits gives a much better understanding of what a civilization is. So first off, a civilization needs to have a relatively large population. When I say relatively, you have to take into account the total population of humanity at the time. If we're talking about today, civilizations would need to be like millions, if not billions. But around the development of civilizations, you could have a civilization with hundreds or only thousands of people. Again, because the overall population of humanity at the time was small. But you need a relatively large population. You also need to have what I'm calling urban settlement. So first off, we need to define and explain what settlement is. So settlement is when you can live and stay in one spot for the entire year. Settlement was a big deal to come about in human history. For most of humanity, for most of our existence, humans have been and had been hunters and gatherers. Basically, in order to get food, they had to go out and find it. And if their food supply migrated or moved, they would have to migrate or move with their food supply. This was prior to the development of agriculture, prior to the point when humans had control over their own food supply and could grow their own food. So if your food supply moved, you had to migrate with it. So early humans were what are called nomads, meaning they don't live in a fixed spot. They don't settle. They migrate along with their food supply. But a civilization can't migrate. A civilization needs settlement. People need to live in fixed spots. And not only does it need settlement, it needs what I call urban settlement, meaning people need to be living in villages, towns, or cities. So it has to be large enough and developed enough to support fairly large communities, basically multiple families or clans living with each other or living near each other. Okay? A civilization also needs to have what sociologists call complex institutions. Basically, sociologists refer to various social constructs and big parts and components of society as institutions. So when we're talking about institutions in the sense of a civilization, some examples would be things like governments, religions, or social structures. A civilization needs to have these institutions. They don't necessarily need to have these three, but they need to have something like a government or like a religion and like a social structure to give it some structure and guidance, so there's some order to it. Basically, so there's some direction to what's going on, and it's not just everybody for himself. A civilization also needs to have what we call specialization of labor. So what this means, the specialization of labor, is a civilization needs to have people working different types of jobs. So in a civilization like we have now, not everybody is involved in food production or directly involved in food production. If you have specialization of labor, a portion of your population will be involved in food production, but another portion will be involved in other things. So in these early civilizations, you'd have people who were, again, involved in farming and making and growing food, but you'd also have a portion of the population involved in things like metalworking, construction, weaving or working with clothing, governing. You'd have people doing different jobs that are not just, not everyone is directly involved in getting food. A civilization will also have a culture. Culture is a weird topic, or it's a hard word to define. It's one of those words where it almost has the vibe of like, you know what culture is when you see it, but you can't really define it. Like I generally use the saying, like, you could probably ask 10 different historians what culture is, you'll get 11 different definitions. Culture doesn't necessarily have a universally agreed upon definition, but there are some universally agreed upon elements that go into culture. These would be things like social customs, shared community values or beliefs or practices. It can also encompass things like clothing, diet, religious beliefs, again, shared values or morals. But so those elements would factor into culture. Civilization also needs language. You need a way to communicate. You need a fairly complex way to communicate. You need a language, and typically you will need to use that language, or you will need to have some form of record keeping. This does not necessarily mean writing. The Incas are a good example of a civilization that met all of these characteristics, but they notably did not have a system of writing, but they did have a system of record keeping. So civilizations will have a language and a means to communicate, and they will have a way to keep records. That may not necessarily be writing, though. If you really think about it, developing a system of writing is probably one of the most difficult things to invent. Like, especially if you have to do it, like, just imagine having to invent writing from scratch. That is just crazy. Like, that'd be ridiculously hard. Which explains why it's happened so rarely that systems of writing have emerged independently of each other in human history. And lastly, a civilization will have technology. Now, technology is a pretty broad term. What we're meaning by technology is really they've developed tools and techniques to use to aid them. And they are primarily based, and they're man-made. They're made by humans. They don't come from nature. So the prime example of early technology would be the wheel. A wheel is a form of technology. A rope would be technology. It's not found in nature. We have to make it. So technology is a pretty broad concept, but it basically means refers to man-made tools used to accomplish a task. So if we look at these traits of civilizations, again, large populations, urban settlements, complex institutions like government, religion, or social structure, the specialization of labor, culture, a language, and technology. And then if you think about what agriculture is and what the benefits of agriculture are, all of a sudden it becomes easier to understand why we can't get this without agriculture. And to explain that, let's talk about agriculture. So, agriculture, simply, is the domestication of plants and animals. Basically, it is human beings taking control and influencing the behavior and growth and development of plants and animals. And over long enough periods of time, we've even managed to influence the evolution of plants and animals through domestication. A prime example, look at all the different breeds of dogs there are. Dogs are a prime example of animals that have been that have basically evolved because they've been bred for so long by humans to favor specific traits. So when we think about agriculture, it's humans essentially taking control over the growth and reproduction of plants and animals. There are a number of benefits to using this as our way of getting food than hunting and gathering. So again, prior to the development of agriculture, early humans got their food by hunting and gathering. Hunting and gathering, it's really unproductive, and you really have to hope you find everything you need. And again, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about settlement, if the food supply migrates, like say with the seasons, you also have to migrate with your food supply, or else you're going to starve to death. So this has a number of problems or a number of issues that really don't allow hunting and gathering to support a civilization. For one, hunting and gathering is really not productive. The only way you're going to get enough food to feed everybody is if everybody who is able is actively involved in getting food and getting the food they need day after day after day. Hunting and gathering does not allow for people to do different jobs. So for example, you're not going to get a guy in a hunting and gathering group who can take the time to learn how to work with metal and make tools out of metal, because that's time he would have to take away from getting his food. And this method is so unproductive, if he's not getting his food, no one else can get enough food to feed him, if that makes sense. Kind of going along with that, since hunting and gathering is so unproductive, you can't really live in a really large group and be a hunter-gatherer, because you just don't get the food you need to support a large group of people or a large population. So with those issues with hunting and gathering, agriculture addresses them. So first off, agriculture is a lot more productive than hunting and gathering. So what that means is if you put in roughly the same amount of time and effort into agriculture that you would put into hunting and gathering, you're going to get a lot more food out of it. So agriculture is a way to produce more food with roughly the same amount of time and the same amount of work. Actually, usually with less time and less work. Agriculture is so productive to the point where it can actually result in, basically today, does result in a food surplus, meaning that if everyone is involved in farming, you're going to grow more food than you need. So really what this means is not everybody in your society needs to be involved in farming or growing or making food, because a smaller number of people can do that and still make enough and grow enough to feed everybody else. A prime example of that is the modern day United States. The modern day US has only a very small percentage of the population are farmers. It's less than 10%. It may even be less than 5%. But again, that small percent of the population is able to grow enough food to not just feed the rest of the country, but also to grow a surplus that we could then export to other countries. So agriculture and this food surplus is really a remarkable innovation and a huge asset in the development of humanity and civilization. This food surplus allows us to do, and allows basically allows society to do a couple of things. First off, since there's more food, since there's more than enough food to go around, we can have population growth. Again, it's just simple math. If we've got more food than we need, we can have more people now. So agriculture, since it supports this population growth, it supports the large population that we need. Agriculture allows for the development of large populations. Furthermore, since there's extra food, and not everybody needs to be involved in food production to feed everybody, then that means a portion of the population can do other stuff. So we get this specialization of labor under a farming system, a productive farming system, where let's say you've got 10 people who are of working age, 9 of them are farmers, but they can grow enough food to feed all 10, then that 10th guy can go out and maybe learn how to work with metal and make metal tools that can then factor into farming and make it even more productive. So that way, instead of taking 9 people to grow enough food to feed 10 people, then it now only takes 8 or 7. And now you've got 1 or 2 extra people who can do other stuff and learn new skills to feed back in. Again, so it's what we call a positive feedback loop. These early developments feed back into it or factor back in and make it even more productive. So agriculture gives us the population growth and it gives us the specialization of labor we need. And because we have this specialization of labor, we can also get the complex institutions that we would need, like government or religion. I mean, think about it. You can't really have people of a fully developed government if the population can't grow enough food or make enough food to feed the people in the government. So this is important to allow the development of those complex institutions. The other main benefit of agriculture is that it gives humans more control over their food supply. So unlike hunting and gathering, where you really don't have that much control over your food supply, you just have to hope you find everything you need and hope that you get enough to eat. With agriculture, it's a lot more predictable. We have a lot more control over it. And with this control, means we can settle. It allows or enables settlement. Simply because we no longer have to follow our food around, we can grow it ourselves. And if we can grow it ourselves, we can stay in one spot. So agriculture allows us to have the settlement we need to have a civilization. So if we go back to those traits of civilization, a lot of them really depend on agriculture to develop. We can't have a large population without the food surplus developed by agriculture being more productive than hunting and gathering. We can't have the urban settlements without the control agriculture gives us over our food supply and the greater amount of control it gives us than hunting and gathering. We can't have complex institutions or the specialization of labor without this food surplus. We need the extra food to feed people who do not have to be involved in food production. And really, we can't have technology without people who work in fields to try and develop and improve technology, which requires specialization of labor, which requires food surplus. Okay. I know there was a lot there. I know I went over a lot, and I feel like I did it pretty fast, but that's okay. We are going to keep reinforcing these concepts over this week and over this unit. So homework tonight, what you need to do is I want you to summarize my list of traits from civilization, or of civilizations. You should be able to remember and you need to be able to know those traits from civilizations. And I think that'll make it easier to understand why agriculture is so important in the development of civilization. Okay? If you think about it, this is really kind of a crazy advancement. I mean, the fact that without agriculture, without farming, modern life would not be possible. And I don't know. For me, I view agriculture as probably, for me, agriculture is the most important development in human history. Again, you can disagree if you want. There's not a right or wrong answer. That's just my view. But without agriculture, we don't have civilization. So it's so, so, so important. I can't emphasize that enough. All right. Have a good day, guys. And I will talk to you later.